we chose as our topic today players agent in esports industry, legal challenges, especially around commissions and possibly other compensations, as we have seen a lot of different approaches in the industry in the last few months. And as agencies become more prevalent in the industry, we thought we might make this a basic launch lecture. And with that said, over to you, Nepomuk. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So what I'm trying to do here is give you a little rundown, first of all, of player agents in general. Then I want to talk to you a little bit about the legal situation in Germany, and then we'll focus on everything compensation related. So some of you might be experts when it comes to player agents. Others don't really have an idea about players agents or what they do or why they exist. So a short little rundown here. Why do they exist? Well, there's a power imbalance, an information imbalance between the talents, whether it may be in traditional sports or in esports, and the clubs for which they play for. A lot of players are young and inexperienced, and on the contrary, a lot of the clubs, clans, guilds, teams, whatever you want to call the orgs, they have a lot of experience. Many of the players need to focus on their performance, not the business side of things, especially because they often have really short careers, more so in esports than in traditional sports. So there's no focus on the economic matters, and yeah. It's also really unusual to have legal disputes. You don't want to be the bad apple, as they say. So it's great to have someone to actually deal with those matters. And thirdly, often there's no like collective body of players, like something like a union or trade union, to provide this kind of counterweight to the club. I mean, there are some in esports. Two specifically, maybe the Counter-Strike, the CC, Counter-Strike's Professional Players Association might be one example here. But whether they are strong enough to be like this viable counterweight, I don't want to discuss it, but there's typically a lack of like a collective body. And this is why we have the players agents. The agents are supposed to mitigate the resulting risks of this power imbalance. So what do they do? This, of course, as always, depends on the individual case. Mostly they're providing some of the following. This can be all of them or some of them, case-by-case basis. So first of all, economic, legal, and sometimes even personal advice, because what we tend to see is that agents in esports and in traditional sports over years and years of being a long-time advisor become also friends. So this kind of advice. Legal advice in Germany especially is really interesting because you're not allowed to provide legal services generally if you're not a lawyer that is admitted to the bar. The regulation is really strict on that. There are a few exceptions, but when we talk about like conducting specific contract negotiations, like negotiating specific clauses, for example, this might be too much already and be considered legal advice that is regulated by the law. So it's great to be a lawyer admitted to the bar while being an agent. Typically agents work with lawyers as well. For everything we discussed today, we'll have like the lenses of the pink glasses. We'll believe that everything's happening the way it should happen according to the law, but especially in traditional sports, there are of course some, let's call them shortcuts. So we know about them, but let's talk about how it should be. Some, probably not always, there's a lawyer involved. Secondly, yeah, industry contacts and know-how. Oh, by the way, when we talk about the lawyers, there is a fine up to 5,000 euros. So it's not like this is a light violation. Also, the concluded contracts can be considered invalid, so you don't get a compensation at all. So these are important things to consider, but yeah, if it's done behind closed doors, no one, of course, knows about it. Yeah, industry contacts. And then what I like to do is kind of part it between like intermediary, everything when it comes to getting a new contractual partner for your client, negotiating the contract, and everything which is more like a personal assistant, support with administration, PR, finances. We'll get to that in a second as well. So what I like the big consequences of that, first of all, great power and responsibility, because they have a lot of influence on the player, again, long-time advisors, maybe long-time friends, and also influence on the transfers and therefore on the clubs. So player agents have a big influence on both of the contractual sides. I'm talking about players right now, but most of it is in general for talents. Talents might be a coach, a content creator in esports. It doesn't have to be a player specifically. Of course, there are dangers with that as well. Abuse of the power I just mentioned. Inappropriate compensation is probably the most important thing, and the lack of transparency would be another. It's like in most industries, right? There are some great examples of doing amazing work by law, and there are some that don't. Is this even relevant economically speaking? The short answer is yes. Maybe you wanna, if you watch the VOD, you wanna stop here and have a look at all of the data and information I gave you here on that slide. The most important thing is, in traditional sports, as an example, football, it grows more and more revenue. Intermediaries are part of more and more deals, especially when it comes to international transfers of players. And the same we can see in esports. The number of esports agents has like increased drastically, from Surge to Prodigy, SCG, Evolved, Stark. There are many big agencies doing a lot of work in the industry. So at least in the successful esports titles, most players, or a big number of players, are nowadays managed by agencies in the professional space, at least. However, there are no really like reliable data at this point on like the development of agents in esports. So yeah, this is why I've only done the numbers regarding traditional sports or football/soccer, to be more precise. When we talk about regulations, there's often two types of regulation. First of all, everything state or federal level. In Germany, for example, there are some laws, we'll have a look at them in a moment, that regulate especially intermediary work of agents. And of course, there can be tournament organizer regulations. For example, in traditional sports, we have FIFA regulation on players' agents. We have also on a national level federation regulation, for example, the German Football League, to which we will refer maybe in a few minutes as well. In esports right now, the regulation level when it comes to agents or intermediary work is pretty low, but internally a lot of the tournament organizers, may they be publishers or third parties like ESL or EFG now, or Freaks for You Gaming, there are talks for a few years now whether it does make sense to regulate players' agents, and if so, how you can do it. Because as some of you might know, it's not too easy to have a good players' agents regulation, as FIFA has been showing for more than 2 decades, nearly 3 decades now. We'll get to that in a second as well. So, perfect. So the basis for everything between the agent and the talent is what we call a representation contract. You don't have to name it representation contract, of course, but mostly it's referred to as representation contract. And the legal nature of the contract depends, as always, first of all, on the jurisdiction we're in. but for now, of course, let's pretend we're in Germany. Sorry. And in Germany, we have like this distinction under German law. It depends on the kind of contract you have. So the type of contract you have depends at the end of the day on the individual case. What are the services rendered by the agency for the talent? And what we know in Germany is this distinction between Werkvertrag, which is a contract where you like owe a specific result and you're liable for that to render this specific result, or the Dienstvertrag, which is you're just owed the effort to achieve such a result. So it depends on like social media posts, building stream setups, inbox management support. All of those might probably be on the Werkvertrag level, a specific result is owed. And on the Dienstvertrag level could be something like career advice, where the agent doesn't want to be liable for the specific result, a great career, but just tries his best or her best to support the talent when it comes to career planning. The most important thing we want to like focus on right now is the intermediary service, which would be a Maklervertrag, like roughly translated a broker contract. You don't, as an agent, typically you don't have to do anything, but if you don't do anything, you never get paid, because payment is only made if the result happens, like the intermediation takes place. But as always, this is just the basis. Like you can, if you want to, create one or even multiple contracts with different duties on different levels. Like this time we owe a specific result, with the other service we owe a specific effort, for example. So it's all depending on the individual case, but I'd say like 90% of intermediate services are really broker contracts in Germany. And it can often make sense, this is something I alluded to earlier, to conclude actually two contracts, one in relation to consulting work or personal assistant work, and one when it comes to the intermediation service. Why, we'll see in a second. So there are, in the end of the day, two possible ways to be active as an agent. The first one will start here. By the way, a little spoiler, this is the not common one. We have like a releasing club and a talent. They have a player contract, and the agent has a representation contract with the talent. And now the talent wants to join a new club, a receiving club. So what the agent does is, based on the representation contract, he renders his intermediary services on behalf of the talent. There are two types in Germany. One is what you could roughly translate to as a verification broker. The service he needs to render is just bringing the partners together, like the player and the receiving club. And then at the end of the day, what he's owed, like the result, this is the specific result he's owed. And then there's the intermediary broker who has way more tasks. For example, taking care of the contract negotiations we talked earlier, like negotiating a new contract, everything revolving around that. In this situation, typically we have an intermediary broker because he only represents the talent, and he will stay as the representative of the talent. And so he'll do all of the negotiation with the receiving club, for example. And then he gets paid, compensation, of course, being the topic today, by the talent. And one important thing here is the compensation, and we'll get to that in a second, typically is based on the gross salary or the gross value of the deal. But the talent, of course, pays it with his net worth, with his income. So this is already a spoiler why the situation isn't too beloved by agents. Again, several disadvantages to this model. First of all, In Germany, after social law, this is called employment intermediary. So we have like a limited maximum of compensation. There's no additional expenses allowance on top of that. There is an exception for artists and professional sports athletes, but right now it's unclear. There's no ruling on whether this would also apply to esports professional players. The problem is that the documents for this law are really narrow, so you cannot really work with them at all. So there's really this 50-50 chance of it applying or not applying. Furthermore, like the contract has to be in writing, and we're talking red ink because Germany and digitization is a whole different beast. And also the compensation must be in writing before you enter into contract negotiations, for example. No exclusivity clause, which is a big problem for most of sports and esports agents. So a lot of problems that come with being qualified as employment intermediary. Also, there's some other disadvantages. I have to look at the clock right now, so I need to be a little bit faster even. Compensation must be paid by the player. We already talked about this. And any deal after the intermediation that the receiving club shall pay the compensation instead of the talent, which is situation 1, may lead to a loss of claims and even tax evasion, different possible criminal offenses. This is something we see in practice actually often, that you have like situation 1 and then the player or the talent gets, oh, wait a second, now I have to pay the fee for like the compensation for the agent. That's big. That's a problem. Can we kind of change it? The answer is no, or not too easy, at least. Situation 2 is way more common because most of the disadvantages we talked about a second ago do not apply. So we have the releasing club, the talent, the agent, and we have a first representation contract. And what happens is that the agent renders his services, but here there's not like a focus on doing all of the work. He only brings the parties together, and then he switches sides. They'll end the contract, the first representation contract between talent and agent, and it's super important that this is done in the right way. And then they conclude a new contract between the agent and the receiving club. And the agent is now negotiating the contract for the receiving club. So he renders his services on behalf of the club, not for the talent anymore. And then hopefully then conclude the player contract. Then he gets paid by the receiving club, which is like the big difference. So there are some risks involved there as well. First of all, the law stipulates that the compensation, like if the agent, the big problem in this situation is that first the agent is like the contractual partner of the talent, and then he switches sides to the club. And of course his interests may shift. If you're like an agent with integrity, this is not a problem, but some agents might not be. So it's really important, like the timing, the documentation, they're of essence, so that there is no overlap time-wise when it comes to those two contracts. Because if there might be a law applicable in Germany which forfeits the agent's provision or compensation. So this is not without risks, because German law kind of is not the biggest fan of this situation, but at the same time it's the dominant practice in sports, and we see even more that's like coming over to esports as well. So I'd say maybe Moritz has a different opinion on that, but this is the dominant practice in esports now as well. So it's not without risks, but it's the dominant practice. And when we take a look at rulings, most of the times those rulings accept this situation, but of course it has to be timed right, documented right, whatsoever. The big thing while we need more contracts is if the consulting services, not the intermediary services, but the consulting services are also part of that representation contract, and you terminate that contract, then the talent isn't your client anymore in terms of the other consulting services, inbox management, PR, whatever. So therefore, in our opinion, it's easier, especially under German law, which has a high focus on transparency, just to have one more contract, like having a first representation contract with the client and the consulting service contract, then ending the first representation contract and having a second representation contract with the club. So typically, this will help you with all of the services the agent owes to the talent and the other way around. Perfect. I know we're at 20 minutes. This is the last important slide with in terms of compensation. The limitation of compensation, we actually already talked about it. So in situation one, the compensation is limited to this 2,000 euros unless you have this specific sports athlete or artist situation in which, like, typically 14%, including VAT, of the gross salary of the employee makes up the compensation. In situation two, you don't have a limit unless, of course, there's regulation from a tournament organizer. In traditional sports, typically you have like a compensation. When you have situation two, you have this compensation between 10 and 15%. It's getting bigger, especially in terms of international transfers. But yeah, the receiving club either like pays a lump sum or like installments pro rata to gross annual salaries. Oh, this is on the right, how to pay. The one thing we see really often when we have in our practice work, when we talk about agents, is that they often want to have in situation one a clause in the contract, in the transfer contract, that the compensation for the agent shall be paid directly to the agent from the club, but of course the talent's net income is the basis for that compensation. So what you can do is you can have like a shortcut of payment, as long as it really only is a shortcut. You don't need any invoices between agents and the respective club, because otherwise this could be seen as like a second contract, which then brings up the problem that if you're as an agent on both sides, your compensation may be forfeited as a whole. So this is something we see so super detailed when it comes to documentation, timing, and especially everything revolving around taxation, or in worst cases, even employment contracts. Perfect. So this was a rundown. I know I took a little bit too much time, and I also were really fast, but hopefully, yeah, you got a good idea about agents in sports and esports, the development in esports, and the problems when it comes to compensation.
Thank you, Nepomuk. I think it was necessary to cover the basics to really explain the compensation issue we really do see quite a lot in the esport industry right now.